The Open Highway podcast is a production of Viking Dog Entertainment, and now you can visit the all-new Viking Dog store for access to everything that Viking Dog has to offer. Movies, books, and apparel, including motivational lines, open highway merchandise, and exclusive wolf designs that raise money for wolf rescue organizations. So visit thevikingdogstore.com today. So what do you do when you run into people that think they know what went down over there? Like, I know a lot of people in the military who some of them were in theaters, some of them are just, stateside, but they're like, well, I knew someone who told me this, or I know how the military works, or blah, blah, blah. Or whether it's just a regular civilian who's like, buys it hook, line, and sinker what they got on whatever media, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, doesn't matter. You've got the experience, you've got the track record, you've got, where the bodies are buried, to use a really horrible term for this. But how do you deal with that? How do you go up against somebody and be like, you don't know, you just don't know?
Yeah, I mean, and even now, 12 years later, you still encounter that. And I try, like anything, you try and meet people where they're at. So I think I try and understand what they're coming from and try and give them examples. I'll recommend books to people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the books I recommend aren't about the Afghan or Iraq wars. The books I recommend most of the time are, David Halberstam's The Best and the Brightest, or Neil Shaheen's White Shining Lie, which are books about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I say, if you read those books about Vietnam, you will understand these wars. I mean, you'll understand the personalities that have propelled these wars, that have sustained these wars, that continue these wars. You'll understand lying. I mean, I'll point now that, in 2019, December 2019, the Washington Post put out their Afghan papers, which was a collection of over 400 interviews with senior U.S. officials, whether they be military or civilian, and clearly documents that from the Bush administration through the Obama administration into the Trump administration, the war in Afghanistan was one systemic lie, clear, right? Yeah. So I'll point to things like that. I'll say, look, we know that, the Iraq war was a lie. That we know that the British Parliament did an inquiry on the war in Libya in 2011, and the British Parliament said that was built on a lie. We know that Vietnam, all these things. Why would you believe this is any different? So it's more, trying to get people to put the pieces together about how this is one continuous, because if you talk about Afghanistan as a singular war, it loses much of the context and loses the history that begins it, the idea that, you could talk about all kinds of things. You could talk about, like, you realize that, like, the same guys that began these wars, Rumsfeld, Cheney, they were a part of the Vietnam War. They were in the Ford administration when the Vietnam War ends. Mm-hmm. These guys that are part of the neoconservative, this is where they begin. They begin at the end of the Vietnam War. And they weren't like minor people in the Ford administration. They were the White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of Defense.
Yeah.
And and then they become the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense, for these wars. There's a continuity, there's a line that runs through all of this. So it's getting, I think for me, it's trying to get people to see the whole narrative, the whole construct of these wars, and not look at the individual details, because you can certainly get, you can get lost in minutia, basically, that, in the span. The other thing too with these wars is to understand, particularly, say, whether it be the Iraq or the Afghan war, these wars didn't begin in September of 2001 or March 2003. May have begun that, we may say that in the United States, but certainly not the case. The war in Afghanistan goes back to the 1970s. This is a living legacy of the Cold War. The Iraq War, this goes back to the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, which the United States viewed as a proxy war and subordinate, on and on and on. You remind people that, look, remember during the 90s, not just the sanctions in Iraq, the fact that the Clinton administration was bombing Iraq once every 3 days. Every third day, the U.S. throughout the 90s, the U.S. was dropping bombs on Iraq. The war didn't begin in March '03. You know what I mean? So I think it's trying to get people to understand the whole, as opposed to, hey, my cousin was over there and he said this, and I'm sure that might have been true. And I'm sure your cousin went there as try to be moral, try to be a good person. I did that. One of the things I try and get across to people as much as anything is that no matter how moral you think you are, if you take part in such an immoral circumstance like war, you will be an agent of that immorality. No matter how
no one gets out. Yeah, no one gets out unscathed.
No, you can't. And you will. It's as just reminded of this. It's within the Catholic Church, there's a whole doctrine about this: occasion to sin. Right? Mm-hmm. If you put yourself in those circumstances, you are allowing yourself an occasion to sin. Right? I mean, you're putting this is. So again, I try and get that larger context to people. Because you're still, but the majority of Americans, and I was just saying this to some folks in the anti-war and peace movement the other day, is that, look, you guys have been successful. You may not think you're successful, may not come across that way, but even with the catastrophe as the media and everyone else portrayed it this past August of the retreat from Afghanistan, the evacuation to the airport, even as bad as that came across, so as much as 75% of Americans still were supporting Joe Biden, saying, yeah, we should get out of Afghanistan.
It came out so it was like anybody who had followed the war at all, who you don't even have to be a student of history, just been conscious for the last 20 years. Anybody who watched that and went, oh, wow, this is all happening so suddenly. This is all because of what was done last week. This is all, this microcosm of the withdrawal. It's like, where have you been for the last 2 decades? Have you, and I'm on the outside, you were on the inside. You saw it falling down around you while you were there. So there had to have been no surprise when things went the way that they did. And I don't mean that in a kind of a hubris, like I told you so kind of way. I mean, it had to be kind of painful. You were trying to warn people.
I didn't think the collapse was going to happen that quickly. I don't know. The Taliban didn't think that was the case. The Taliban actually, according to our own military, according to General McKenzie, head of Central Command, when President Ghani flees Afghanistan and Kabul is basically empty now, the Taliban in mid-August say to the American military, if you guys want to control Kabul until we have our act together and can form an interim government, go ahead. I mean, this is what General McKenzie, U.S. military, says happens in August. The Taliban didn't know it was going to happen this quickly. They weren't prepared for it. I think, my thoughts was it would take a matter of months, in that, like, as province after province, and that it would be a steady collapse. But, again, the way so many of us have been describing this for a while now is as a house of cards. And have you ever seen a house of cards come down? It doesn't come down slowly. And you get those whole issues of positive feedback, right? Things collapse, systemic collapse, and it is. And I take the view that the evacuation was actually quite miraculous. The fact that only 13 Americans were killed, 120,000 people were evacuated from an airport with one functional runway in the center of the capital city of a victorious enemy of a 40-year war, not a 20-year war, 40-year war. Only 13 Americans were killed.
And you kept hearing about like these there on the news. And I finally had to start turning it off. You kept hearing there was always like one person who would be an American who said, well, I can't get to the checkpoint. And it's like, okay, well, they're rescuing thousands of people, but the media is grabbing this one story of this one person who can't get there because they lived like 6 hours outside of town. There were like all these extenuating circumstances, and you're watching the reports, and it's like, it's not reported how many success stories, and in the middle of a war zone. I was a student of World War II, and it's like you go back and you look at the stories of it's a clusterfuck. That's what a war zone is. So to expect that everything is going to, all the T's are going to get crossed and then I's are going to get dotted and it's going to go beautifully, you've never paid attention to what goes on in combat or in a fluid situation. So the media would grab these stories like, well, we have a report of this one person who hasn't been able to get in. How horrible. And it's like, yeah, I feel for that person. Let's try to help them. But there's a point where I kept watching, and this is leading to my next question for you, is I kept watching like the reports from the Pentagon or the public affairs officer and everybody. And it was like, you just wanted them to come out and be like, this is a war. This is a combat situation. Shit's going to happen. And I guess as Americans, we don't say that anymore. We just expect it to be 110% performance based, or else you're going to get replaced. You're fired. That's kind of, we have this, well, you're going to quit because it didn't go well. Nothing ever happened. So we had some of the congressional hearings have been starting to happen about the fall, and you see the generals like, I told Biden this, I didn't tell him this, so many troops. What's been your reaction to some of the excuses and some of the, I'll just say it, cover-ups and some of the rhetoric that's coming out as people are already trying to dissect it? And what are we, a couple weeks out of it really? And they're already trying to tear it apart. What did you think when you started seeing some of that and hearing it?
The whole encapsulation of a discussion that revolves around, as you were saying, Eric, a few weeks as opposed to decades. Mm-hmm. That somehow all the framing over and over again was about the last few weeks, not about the last 20 years, and then the again, I think it's the cover-ups by these generals who were, I told Biden, you got a guy like General Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who says things like, I told Biden to keep 2,500 troops there. And then he gets asked, would that have made a difference? No, it wouldn't have made a difference. And no one is jumping over the table wanting to strangle this guy. You're the fucking head of the goddamn United States military. You're saying to keep 2,500 US troops in Afghanistan for no reason. They let these kids die and it's not going to make a difference, but you're saying that's what you recommended. I mean, so there's the outrage, the anger. Now, supposedly they're going to have these, supposedly there's going to be hearings on the entirety of the war, I guess, which will be, they're just going to parade out the same people who led the war. If anyone's ever watched the House Armed Services Committee or Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, it's like a bunch of bobblehead dolls. All you see these people do is in Congress is nod their head up and down in agreement with the generals and the admirals. And and it will be a team red versus team blue spectacle. Yeah. And that's what it's all geared towards. The people who will be brought on will do everything they can to protect their legacies, to try and prove their ideologies, to continue to be good representatives of the different defense industries that they now work for. The members of Congress, it will be, maybe with one or two exceptions, I'm not really sure, but the majority of them will either be trying to use this as a means to attack Biden or protect Biden. And, the actual oversight, in the sense of the word oversight, of holding people accountable for this catastrophe, for these wars that have killed and wrecked millions of lives. I'll go again. Not even talking about what was done to the Iraqis, the Afghans, the Syrians, all throughout Africa. Leaving that aside, which is something that will be done, of course, because no concern will be ever shown for those people. But on the American side, again, 2.7 million men and women go to these wars, about half see combat. We know about 500,000 have traumatic brain injury, about 500,000 have post-traumatic stress disorder. The biggest problem with these is that most of those numbers are based upon self-reporting. And as we discussed earlier, that's not the easiest thing to do with this community. So you then have, you're talking about millions of people impacted by these wars. We've had, there's been more than 30,000 active duty and veteran suicides since 2001. Of those numbers, about 12,000 or so was from combat veterans. And if you then you do the ratios and everything, you see that those numbers are really off the charts. When you look at the rate of suicide for whether it be active duty or veterans, it's roughly the same as with the general population, because what you do is you pull out the number of suicides among combat veterans, and that basically sort of equalizes the rate of suicide between veterans and active duty and civilians. When you look at the rate of suicide for combat veterans, you see that the rate of suicide is anywhere from 4, depending on the demographics, anywhere from 4 to 12 times higher than for civilians. Among our youngest veterans, men in their 20s, their rate of suicide is 6 to 10 times higher than for men their age who did not go to Iraq or Afghanistan.
So do you think PTSD, so it feels like, we went from this place where, we came out of Vietnam. Well, let's go back. We'll do a little history dance here. So you go back far enough and it was just shell shock. Yeah. And it was, if you don't get on the line, you're going to get incarcerated or executed. We got past that. Then we started to say, oh, well, they're just, touched by the war. We used to say things like people come back from World War II. Well, grandpa just doesn't talk about it.
Yep.
And then we got to a point where I'm fudging on my history a little bit. And you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But, it seemed like, we kind of got out of Vietnam and we started addressing, okay, something's going on. There's what we didn't quite call it PTSD yet. And then that started to come along. And as a society, we kind of went, you know what? We need to deal with this. PTSD is a real thing. And we did. And then it started to feel like PTSD became a catch-all, because I'll even say, I came out of I got divorced and people are like, how you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm suffering PTSD. And it became this kind of terminology where it's like COVID. Oh, I'm PTSD from COVID. It became this small lowercase PTSD. And it almost feels like that we're taking it away from the situation, not to belittle. Hey, I came out of my divorce. I definitely had problems. If anybody's ever gone through one, you have it.
Absolutely.
But that's compared to somebody who, went through a war zone or saw these visuals and lives with them day to day, hears a loud noise or gets taken back. It feels like we're making it something broad and smaller. And it almost feels like these soldiers will get forgotten, or the severity of what they're going through gets forgotten societally. That's my opinion.
I always push back on but what I went through is not what you went through. I always push back on that, because everyone's individual experiences are unique to them. Suffering is suffering. And the idea that but what I went through is not what you went through, that's a coping mechanism. That's a way for us to diminish our own suffering, to deflect from an avoidance mechanism, right? Well, maybe if I was going through what he went through, then I would go see a therapist, then I would go get help. But what I went through really that's not really important. That's not really a big deal. I just need to man up or woman up or whatever and take this on. And so I always want to push back on that, because whatever you're going through is unique to you. It shouldn't be belittled, and recognize that kind of statement but what I went through is not what he went through or she went through, as what it is, a coping or avoidance mechanism.
Okay.
With regards to the mental and emotional effects of war, this is well documented. This goes back thousands of years. The Romans used to have camps where they would bring their soldiers back to try and recover, have some type of rest area for
I'd
them.
Heard that it was like a separate area. They realized that they were soldiers, they were warriors, they needed
exactly. They were going through this, and no matter who you were, people are familiar with Homer writes about in the Iliad, his descriptions match up with a diagnosis of PTSD. Shakespeare as well. There's all kinds of written records. You get to the American Civil War, and you have what then comes into the American Civil War is morphine. which takes it one step further. And there are estimates that as many American veterans died after the war as died during the war.
Mm-hmm.
That due to overdose, alcoholism, exposure, suicide, as many veterans died after the war, in the decades after the war, as during the war. And if you go and you look at the literature from the time, you'll see that pretty much every city, town has examples of these Civil War veterans who are drinking themselves to death, who are overdosed, who are dying out in the cold, who are blowing their head. I mean, and it's called soldier's heart then. World War II, the other good war, because there is this notion that somehow this didn't affect previous generations, which is complete bullshit. Anyone who says that just does not know what they're talking about. Look, 15 million men and women in uniform in World War II, about 7 million saw combat. 1 in 7 were discharged for psychiatric diagnoses during the war. 1 in 7 combat veterans. In some Army and Marine Corps units, it was between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 were diagnosed for mental health disorders.
I didn't know that.
And discharged with a medical diagnosis. I mean, it wasn't talked about. After the war, the American government actually censors films and documentaries about this. It's just not, I mean, it wasn't just the fact that you were being polite and not talking about, but it was an actual, there were films that were censored by the US government. And you have to remember this, put this in the context, as you said, Eric, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is not a recognized diagnosis by the American Psychiatric Association until 1980 or 1981, one of the two. So you're talking about 1 in 7 combat veterans, and in some cases 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 Marine and Army combat veterans being discharged with a mental medical diagnosis 40 years before, or 35 years before PTSD is even a recognized psychiatric diagnosis in the United States. I mean, that should just tell everyone who thinks that somehow what this generation is going through is different, that they have no idea what they're talking about. Vietnam, and you see, and the VA knows this. By 1991, the VA has recognized that in Vietnam veterans, the best predictor of suicide in combat veterans is combat-related guilt. And this is where you start to see this really divides into 3 groups. You have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the body's response to, our survival system was meant for, our ancestors, they're in the cave and a saber-toothed tiger walks into the cave, right? That's, your fight, flight, freeze response, that whole limbic system, that's where it comes from. It's not meant to be on every day. You go to Iraq or Afghanistan, or you're, wherever you are in these wars, you're in Vietnam, and every day for a year, you are going out hunting other people and other people are hunting you. Your survival mechanism is turned on all the time. And in very late terms, you can imagine it as a valve, right? The valve opens when those survival chemicals, your adrenaline, your cortisol, et cetera, are needed, and it closes when it doesn't. But if you're over in war and you're hunting people every day and people are hunting you for 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, a year, 15 months. I have one friend who's in Afghanistan. His unit served the longest deployment. They were there for 17 months, I think, and that valve gets stuck open. So that's basically what PTSD is. You come back, all these survival chemicals, it's adrenaline, it's cortisol, it's running through your body. That's why you have the hypervigilance, you have the hyperstartle responses. It affects you while you sleep. So you have nightmares. That leads into issues with depression, anger, you're not fitting in, you're having relationship problems. That leads into, problems in the workplace or whatever. That leads into substance abuse, right? So that's PTSD, and that affects about between 15 and 20% of Iraq and Afghan veterans, about 20% of previous war veterans as well. One thing to note about suicides is it doesn't go away. In 2010, a big study was done of World War II veterans. And World War II veterans, so this is 2010, this is 65 years after the war. These men are in their 80s. They are still killing themselves at a rate 4 times higher than their civilian peers. So 65 years after the war, these men are still putting guns in their mouth and blowing their heads off at a rate 4 times higher than other men their age who did not go to war.
But
so
they probably, I would think that in retrospect, when people look at that, they don't tie it together.
No, they don't. And the
because
mistake,
they're like, oh, well, he's getting old. He had this, he had that.
and if that was the case, then the rate should be the same as other men his age.
Right. Yeah.
Because people will say, so I'll hear this all the time. Well, it's because, their finances or their wife has died. And well, then how come all the other 80 years old aren't doing that?
Yeah.
So the other part of this then is you got PTSD, you've got the traumatic brain injury, which we spoke about, which is tied significantly to suicide. And then you have what's called moral injury, which is the guilt, the shame, the regret, the fact that you've transgressed, you have violated your principles. And that is the worst of all this. I mean, I live with these migraines that are, we started talking at what time? 2:00 in the afternoon, my time. I could not get out of bed today until 1 p.m. because of my migraines, right? I mean, like, that's just, and I had them yesterday and I had them the day before. This is the way I live, right? I mean, and my moral injury will say, that's right. That's just, you deserve to be punished. I mean, that's the way moral injury works. The pain of the moral injury, the fact that the foundations of who you are is worse than anything. I mean, I know guys who are WMPTs who will say that the moral injury is worse than losing their legs. The moral injury, as I said, by 91, the VA is saying that combat-related guilt is the best predictor of suicide in combat veterans. Mm-hmm. This is substantiated over the last 30 years by nearly every study. I mean, and it continues to be substantiated. If you go to combat, you have a much greater risk of suicide. I just saw a study from 2 years ago. I believe it was, if you go to Iraq or Afghanistan and you don't see combat, or I should say, you do see combat, you have a 68% greater chance of suicide than someone who went to Iraq and Afghanistan and didn't see combat. And this has got to do with, again, the guilt, the shame, the regret. And it could be for a variety of different reasons. There's betrayal involved, the fact that you went to these wars built on lies, you were betrayed. You see, one of the things that's interesting about suicide and the active duty military and among female veterans is how high it is. Yeah. Women don't kill themselves as often as men do. But within the US military and veterans community, very high rates of suicide among women. Some of this may be applied to combat, but a lot of it is because 1 in 4 women will be raped or sexually assaulted while they're in the military. And remember, most women are only in the military for 3.5, 4 years, right? Your average enlistment. Mm-hmm. So you've got a 1 in 3, 1 in 4 chance of being raped or assaulted. Who are you likely raped or assaulted by in the military? The military knows this. It's not some stranger on the base, not someone you've never seen before, someone jumping out of the bushes and grabbing you. It's one of your leaders. So if you're a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps or a specialist in the Army, you are most likely to be raped by your corporal or your sergeant. And so that leads into and then you got the whole issues in the military with this, where, woman after woman, and actually I shouldn't just say women, because the incidents of sexual assault and rape against men in the military are enormous. I mean, I've had many men tell me these stories that it is, so, and the same thing happens. And if you're a man, you're not going to say anything because you're completely embarrassed and ashamed of it. So you're not going to tell someone you're raped, right? But for among the women, when they do go forward and go to their first sergeant or their company commander and say, I was raped, we see so often that nothing comes of it. They protect the corporal and the sergeant who raped them.
Yeah.
So you have this betrayal, and that's a form of moral injury as well. And moral injury exists across the board. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I believe cops kill themselves at elevated rates, doctors kill themselves at elevated rates. This sense of failure, this sense of guilt, the shame, the regret that you either did something, or maybe I dealt with it because I had a friend of mine who died. It was an accident. We were in a helicopter. We made a water landing. 4 guys died, including my friend Train. No way I could have saved them. No, I would have drowned myself if I tried to save him. But that guilt, right? And the problem with the wars is that none of us have one story. So I go to therapy, I deal with that, right? And it's just, man, Eric, it's peeling the onion. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as I've come to peace to a degree with Train's death, the fact that I don't want to kill myself over anymore because I failed, and just to tell people how bad this gets is because I go and see Train's wife, Maggie, and his daughters won't talk to me. His son does. His 5-year-old boy does. That kid's now about 21 years old. And his son says to me, why didn't you do more to save my father? Right? That's what you're dealing with. And then you go to therapy and you get through that. But then it's peeling the onion, man. And it's the next thing. It's those women in Baghdad that I feel guilty over, right? On and on and on and on and on. And so because we've all done this so much, you never get there's no getting to the end of it.
Yeah.
So you just have to kind of make peace with who you are, what you did, realize you don't have a time machine, and just try and atone and live your life in a better way going forward.
So how does, you mentioned, and we talked a little bit about like self-medication, drinking, drugs, whatever keeps the demons at bay. I'm going to use that term. I can understand how easy it would be to fall into that when you get back home and you start thinking about it. You go to the corner bar, you go to, go to the fridge, whatever, go to the bodega and get your weed or your Coke, whatever. What Coke probably isn't something that helps the demons go away. But when you're still there and you're still on base, like you said earlier, like you couldn't drink when you were in Afghanistan, when you don't have those tools to self-medicate, how do the people in the midst of it deal with it?
I mean, guys are certainly drinking over there, and guys are doing drugs over there. I mean, it happened. I mean, like, it would happen. I mean, stuff would. I remember, in Iraq, my second time, two guys got drunk that were having an affair. One guy was trying to break up with the other guy or whatever, and the other guy shot him through the neck. Right. I mean, this is one of the reasons why you don't want to mix alcohol and guns. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But no, I mean, certainly, it was crazy in Iraq. I had alcohol because I was a civilian in Iraq. I had alcohol with me all the time in Tikrit. And when I was a Marine in Iraq, I didn't have alcohol, but I know my guys had it. I know they were drinking in their areas, in their trailers. Yeah, I mean, there's ways. Absolutely, people send it. And as long as it's not affecting the mission, you're not very concerned about it. But you are concerned because you got guys drinking and they've got weapons, and that can happen. I mean, very quickly it can happen. Afghanistan, I couldn't drink when. And again, I was a State Department civilian over there. So, but I was always with the military in military units. So I could drink when I go back to the embassy because the embassy had a bar, they had a liquor store, and you drink, and I would just be right back into it. Now, I've always been an alcoholic. So to go from not drinking for 3 months or 4 months or however long to the next day drinking, a 12 pack of beer plus the better part of a fifth of a bottle was no problem. I mean, that's just and then being a high functioning alcoholic, and then the PTSD comes into that, right? So when I'm back home and I'm in the between deployments, and when I'm working at that place, JIDA, the Joint IED Defeat Organization I brought up earlier, and I'm working, it's about 2.5 miles from where I am. It's in Crystal City in Virginia. Crystal City is just a big industrial park, basically, for the Pentagon. I go into work. I get into work at 8:30 or whatever time. I work until 5:30. I'm back. Say I leave at 5. I'm back at my apartment by 5:10. I open a beer. I go to the gym. Right. I work out like a crazed person for because I'm survival. I got to be prepared. Right. So I'm just and then when I'm done with that, it's go to the bar, eat dinner. Right. And then the next, right. And then drink yourself into numbness, into blacking out, and then back at work at 8:30 next morning or whatever time. And that's the way you live. And you're very good at it.
Is leadership aware of that? I mean, and that sounds like a naive question. And even as I say it, I know it sounds naive, but you have there's an obvious issue with performance. There's an obvious issue with PTSD. There's an obvious issue with these soldiers just being able to handle the situation they're in. So when it comes to the chain of command, are they just turning a blind eye to that behavior? Do they say that's the way they're soldiers, that's the way it's always been? Or is there a change where they're starting to look at it and be like, no, there are healthier ways to deal with this. We need to stop it. It's affecting performance. It's affecting our soldiers. It's affecting their mental aspect. Or is it still just SOP? Is it still just the way it's done?
They, depending upon what unit you're in, they're probably more, there are units that would search for the alcohol.
And I don't mean like a babysitting thing. I don't mean it's like you guys can't handle that. I mean like looking at the overall problem and saying, this
Yeah,
can't stand.
over there it was zero. I mean, like there was supposed to be no alcohol, and if you were in a leadership position and you were found with alcohol, you would be removed. I mean, like that kind of thing. Back home, that was you come back home from these wars and you go to a PowerPoint class for an hour. You got a very nice, meaning older man or older lady telling you, you know, don't drink too much, don't hit your wife, those kinds of things. Yeah, that was how it was being handled. Now I understand it's more intense, it's more involved, but for the most part, you still do go from Iraq or Afghanistan because of the way the flights work and everything. You get hung up in places. You get stuck in Kuwait or in one of the oh shoot, what was it, Manis Air Base in Kyrgyzstan or wherever the heck Manis Air Base was. You get stuck there for a day or two. You know, when we come out of Iraq, we have just because of the flights, it takes us after I turn over my company to my replacement. We're on the base at Iraq at the air base for about 5 days before we get a flight. We go back to Kuwait. We're on Kuwait for about 5 days before we get a flight back home, and then and then we're back in California. But there's drinking not on the bases, but as soon as you land in Germany, you land in a special customs area, right? And they've got the Germans have built this in Landstuhl. Is it Landstuhl? No, Leipzig, I think. I forget where. But anyway, they built this special customs area where your charter plane pulls into. And then the Marines all get off and you can go in there and they're selling beer, they're selling food, they're selling chocolates. I mean, and, you know, I remember I was myself and this other captain were the senior guys on the plane. And, you know, it was up to us whether or not we let the guys drink. I mean, they drank so much in 2 hours. And then you land in Maine. You fly into Maine, and there's the entire American Legion and VFW is there welcoming you, and they're buying the kids beers. So and then you're back. We go back to 29 Palms, and yeah, where do they go? They go right out to the bars. They go right to the club. They go right to the liquor store. You know, and you know it. And the rules are you're not supposed to be drinking in the barracks. And you know, what am I going to tell my kids not to drink after what they just went through in Anbar province? You kidding me? You know, I mean, so there is that. The whole military culture glorifies alcohol. I mean, that's just part of it. And there's no other way for these kids to cope and deal with and as well as try and like calm themselves down and de-stress, right? And just relax and try and get full, kind of shake off what they've just been through.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things is that these kids are coming back to worlds that are not the same. I mean, so many of these young men and women, but in my command, so many of my guys, they came back and their wives had left, so now they're coming back to nothing, I mean, I had Marines who, when we were in Kuwait, you go to this point in Kuwait where you go through customs and then you're kind of in this black hole for 24 hours. Remember, this is 2007. So we didn't have cell phones that were going to work really when we landed in Germany or any place like that. So you go into a black hole for 24 hours. And I had Marines who call their wives, last chance to call their wives, hey, I'm coming home. And this is when the wives say, I'm not going to be here when you get back. And they've got, right. Not only that, I mean, to make our story a little even more severe, literally, as we're going through this process of going into this black hole, I have reservists, and a lot of my kids were Virginia Tech students. And this was on the day back in 2007 when the Virginia Tech shootings happened. So I've got all these Marines who are Virginia Tech students who just heard, as they're about to get on the plane in Kuwait and everything, that 20 some odd people have been killed at Virginia Tech in a mass shooting. And they're coming out of some pretty severe combat in Anbar province. They're dealing with the fact their wife may not be there. And now they're hearing that maybe their girlfriend got killed at Virginia Tech. It's just that type of, this is what you're coming, how quick it happens, and now you're back. And so it is. I mean, the leadership, there's an attitude of boys will be boys. I mean, as soon as we get back, a bunch of my corporals get into a fight at a bar, and I gotta go see the regimental XO the next morning about it, and he was like, whatever, thanks for coming in and telling me they got arrested, but what do you expect? There's that attitude, which is the attitude I appreciate, because this is reality. We're gonna
boys will be boys. That's kind of
we're gonna have them go fight for however long in the midst of Anbar province, where every time you leave your patrol base or your FOB or your combat outpost or whatever we're calling it, you're going to get into an IED attack, a gunfight, an RPG is going to get shot at you. You know, I'm going to tell them they can't go and and get drunk and, fight, Marines from 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines or whatever. I mean, go get them. You know, I mean, it's just you just, what can you do?
Yeah.
You know, what can you do? But there is that point, Eric, that the senior people who have the responsibility about this, they understand this is happening. They understand the effect this is happening on these young men and women. And their answers are just to continue the war. The only way this is not going to happen is not to have the war. That's it. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter what type of ideas you have that are somehow going to provide mental and emotional and spiritual relief to young men and women who've just been to war, that you're talking about processes that last for years, that have to undo so much. Because remember, the other thing too is that we take these kids and say you're going to be going in the Marine infantry. You go to 13 weeks of boot camp. You go to, I think it's about 10 weeks now, at least 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks of infantry training. And then you go to your unit where you just spend all your time practicing the kill. And then we send them to a place like Iraq, Afghanistan. We bring them home and we let them out. And what do we expect? And they go home to places where everyone tells them they're a hero. Everyone wants to shake their hand. You go to a baseball game or a hockey game, you can't be there without having to stand up so everyone could salute you. Some guys eat that up. Most of us don't. Most of us want nothing to do with that. And those of us who are dealing with this as a moral injury, who are, my God, I took part in organized murder. Now I got 18,000 people at this Hurricanes game applauding me. So you got that dissonance as well, right? You try and explain to someone about the war, and they say, well, no, but what you were doing your best. You didn't, right? I mean, that's the whole thing again, the whole issue of Nuremberg, right? So all this just is fulminating and is, it's cycling. It's a feedback inside our heads. And they find that, where do you turn? And then what happens is what we usually see is there's an event that occurs, a wife leaves or girlfriend leaves, or whatever that young man or woman was holding on to is gone. And that's when the gun gets put in the mouth. And one of the interesting things about veteran suicide is that among Americans in general, 40 some odd percent, I think it's high 40% use guns in suicide. In veterans, it's almost 70%. Right?
Why do you think that is?
Oh, that's because it's permanent. There's no way you're going to screw it up. Right? You have to work really hard to screw up putting a gun in your mouth and blowing off the back of your head.
Yeah.
When if you use, because they want it done. And that's another thing we know about veteran suicide is that amongst those with suicidal ideation and in attempts, the research shows, the literature shows that to get away from the distress, to get away from the pain, that is what the suicide is. That in my case, I've dealt with suicide. I've dealt with suicide for a long time now, going back to at least 2007, because of the guilt of what I did, took part in these wars. It was a way to escape the pain. That's what it is. It's to get away from that distress. It's nothing about you're scared by a roadside bomb, or you miss the war, or you can't fit in. I mean, those are all things that factor in. Yeah. But we know from the literature, from the research that the VA does constantly on this. Now, what's maddening is that the VA secretary will go to Congress and not say one word about any of this, because moral injury is politically problematic. Right? Go in front of Congress and say these guys are killing themselves because what they did in the war was wrong. Oh my God, you're insulting our heroes. Oh no, you got to support the troops. They can't have done anything wrong. Right? So you have that too, where you have senior leaders who won't even address. I know people who work on moral injury, do a lot of great work on it. And some military bases, depends on the base commander, will allow them to come on base and give presentations, do trainings, right? So that chaplains and psychiatrists and commanders and doctors understand this. Other military bases, the commanders will say, absolutely not. You are not coming here and telling us that what we did was wrong. You know, I mean, so you have that as well, that with senior leadership in terms of, well, this is only going to get worse then. This is never going to end.
There's two paths here. So one, what's the fix on a political instructional policy level? And then the other one is what's working on a treatment level, and what does work and what needs to be fixed. So let's start with policy wise. What do you think needs to be changed in order to help, not just help soldiers who have PTSD and are suffering from it, but how to prevent it? Is there any way to actually prevent it or train them, or can nothing be done proactively?
I certainly proactively, the education, the understanding that this is a natural consequence, that you spend, again, a year overseas hunting people, other people are hunting you. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example in my life. I wasn't, my first year in Iraq, I was not hunting people. I was being hunted though, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the threat, I was with the Iraqi politicians all the time, with Iraqi engineers all the time. I was out with the Iraqi people all the time. I was sitting in provincial council meetings all the time and things like that. I was a target. So the idea of a suicide bomber walking in and blowing himself up was a real present thing for me. I mean, my life was, I used to walk around there with cash. I would wear a suit, because I was a U.S. government official, and I have a little 32 caliber Llama pistol in my suit pocket, that's how I was living. And so then I come back and I'm trying to eat sushi with my girlfriend, and my girlfriend says to me, "You can't even look at me." And the reason why is because I'm looking around the room, because for a year, I've been waiting for a suicide bomber to blow himself up next to me. You know what I mean? So if you know that, you have that type of awareness of what you're getting yourself into and what's going to happen when you get back, well, you can do things about it. You can recognize it. You can, when you're aware, you can go get help, which is absolutely what has to happen with professional help. I mean, I can do it now, where I get what's called a stellate ganglion nerve block, which again, because you go back and you understand, look at how PTSD really is. It's your survival system being stuck open. It's this continual presence of a survival chemicals in your body that's keeping you on edge. Mm-hmm. And so I get what's called a stellate ganglion nerve block. I've had 4 of them. All it is a needle that goes into your neck. It anesthetizes the nerve that's responsible for that survival chemical production and release. It is, in lay terms, it basically resets your survival system, has a temporary effect, although every time you get it, it seems to last longer. And the effect is immediate. And, you can tell you're driving your car, and normally as you pass something on the side of the road, you tense up because you're expecting it's going to blow up or might blow up. After having a stellate ganglion nerve block, you don't do that anymore. I don't every night go around my house checking my locks. Right? I'm not constantly like my head on a swivel looking at everybody and sizing everything up, because those survival chemicals have been cut down.
But it doesn't dull you in any other way. It doesn't.
No, not for me. Yeah, no. And the VA, both the VA and Department of Defense utilize this now. Long wait times to get into it because they simply don't have the anesthesiologists needed to administer this. But and it has a success rate of about 80%. One of the interesting things is that I have sleep apnea because of my PTSD. And so one of the ways my ex-wife would know it was time for me to go get another stellate ganglion nerve block, besides the fact of how I was acting, it was a nightmare to be around. She'd have to walk on eggshells, basically, right? Was the fact that in my sleep, I would stop breathing. I would exhibit the symptoms of sleep apnea. How and why there's a connection, I don't really understand, but there's a connection between sleep apnea and PTSD. So as my sleep apnea resurfaces, time to go get another stellate ganglion nerve block. I mean, there's a lot of therapies that can be used. The main thing though is that you have to get professional help. Anyone who's listening to this, who knows anyone who's a family or friend, if the person is not getting professional help, everyone is kidding themselves about this. There is no way through this other than with professional help. That's it. I mean, you need a lot of other things. And I'll also say this to any women who are listening, because this is what I found in my life. Because men, we're just who we are, particularly those who join the military. You know, we don't want to be weak. We don't want to ask for help. What has helped me in my life, and so many other guys I have seen, is the fact that the women in my life have grabbed me by the ear and dragged me to get help. And that's what has to happen. And there is a truth to the fact that you have to hit rock bottom. I mean, that was my experience. I mean, I had to hit rock bottom before I got help, even though I knew what I was going through. But I just kept lying to myself. I kept telling myself that how I was getting better. I was self-care, you know, et cetera, et cetera. All one lie after another.
We glorify that a little bit in our culture, I think. You know, the soldier that can take care of himself, keep it inside.
Yeah, I was basing this off of, I don't know if you all remember the Dennis Leary television show, Rescue Me, about the firefighter after night. That's where I based a lot of that off of.
Yeah.
And when I actually go back to my resignation letter, I'm up front with Karen DeYoung at the Washington Post that I deal with PTSD. But what I tell her I've made peace with it. Complete fucking lie. But I wanted to, one, not lie about it to the Washington Post. I wanted to be credible. But I was also lying to myself. But I was believing that. Meanwhile, again, I'm drinking unbelievable. I mean, I'm suicidal. You know, all kinds of things. You know, won't have sex with my girlfriend, complete financial disaster. All these other aspects of the mental and emotional and spiritual after effects of war are happening to me. And those are two of the biggest. The financial disaster that we are, it's incredible. So many of us who've come out of these wars and dealing with the after effects of the wars, the invisible wounds, have no money. Where do they go? I mean, it's part of it. You end up just giving your money away, spending your money. I mean, and then the sexual dysfunction is another part that doesn't get spoken about enough. And that's the thing that completely wrecks relationships. You get a young man, comes home from the wars, he's got a gorgeous girlfriend or wife, and he won't touch her. What does that do to her? What does that do to the relationship? No one understands what's going on. Yeah. You know, and you're so embarrassed about it because, you know, I think about this. One of the ways I realize is how bad off I was is every once in a while, you know, you're on your phone or on your computer, an old photo floats up. Yeah. And a photo of my girlfriend from 10 years ago floats up. And I think, holy shit, I wasn't having sex with her. Man, I was really in a bad way, you know? And you think you're the only guy. You think you're the only one dealing with this. You're thinking you're the only one who, I mean, I burned through, you know, I was burning through, I was making, I was making like 10 grand a month at one point after I resigned. I get involved with a think tank. I'm in DC. They're paying me about 10 grand a month. I am burning through 10 grand a month. No problem. Nothing to show for it. I'm driving my 10-year-old Jeep, you know, I mean, like nothing to show for it. You know, I don't even have a flat screen television. Somehow I'm burning through 10 grand a month. Right. I mean, that is one of the consequences of this. And a lot of guys don't get that. They think they're going through this alone. They think that this is unique to them, that somehow they're a real screw up. Yeah. And, you know, how could the wars have anything to do with me not wanting to have sex with my girlfriend or me spending money on nothing and basically have a barren bank account? No, that's got to be on me. And then now you cycle back. That's the secondary and tertiary effects of this, right? The guilt, the shame, the regret. Well, this is the secondary and tertiary level. Now I'm ashamed of myself because I have no money.
And what are you going to go do? To go to a group therapy meeting at the VA?
Right, exactly.
Go sit in a circle
and that stuff helps. That is the best.
I'm not saying it doesn't help, but I think just getting into that room.
Exactly. You have to be, and you go and you show up and you do show up and you lie about how you are. It took me, I didn't admit I was suicidal for like at least almost a year while I was in therapy. And I had great therapists. And it took me over a year, probably. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it took me over a year to say I was suicidal after being in therapy with great therapists. But you go into the group therapy and you're with these guys that you think maybe you've got nothing in common with, or, you know, I mean, they're Vietnam vets or whatever. And then they say something and you just identify with, you know, it's the same thing too. There's one of the things that helped me was my girlfriend at the time, Meg, she got me to watch these films, these short films put out by I think it was by the Wounded Warrior Project, of men and women who are dealing with these issues. And you watch them and you're just like, holy shit, that's exactly what I'm going through. This guy's not having sex with his partner either. Like this guy's run out. All this stuff. This guy, you can't look anybody, can't pay attention anywhere. He's always, all this stuff, blows up over everything, is drinking himself to death. Oh, that sounds a lot like me. Well, okay, let's keep watching this and see what they did. But still, I still had to get to rock bottom. I still had to get to the point where I was literally lying on the floor of my apartment and thinking to myself, like, today's the day you put that gun in your mouth, you kill yourself, or you do something about it. I'm not living like this anymore. I'm not being I'm not going to be a failure like this any longer. Either I end it or I do something. But I had to hit rock bottom, and I think that's a truism that is true more often than not, unfortunately, in the veterans community. And some guys don't, as we can see from the numbers, the sheer numbers, that a lot of guys, that doesn't even help them.
And like you said too, it's something that doesn't necessarily, just because you've conquered it, you haven't really conquered it. Just because you've got it under control. We were talking about the World War II vets, that something can bring it back later in life, or it's, am I right? It's a constant battle. It's not, once you conquered it, it's not just like, you don't just wipe your hands and be like, I'm going to go lead an average life now. It's something you still deal with.
And I think the best the best examples are what we have from our literature, from our religion. You have Judas, after he betrays Jesus, he taking on the gospel, right? He hangs himself or falls on his sword. My favorite is Lady Macbeth, right after she takes part in the murder. She's got the blood on her hands, that phantom blood, that ghost blood that she can't get off no matter what she does. Like, that's moral injury, and it doesn't leave you. It is. And you have to deal with it for your whole life. And it's a life of managing it, self-care of it. The idea that somehow you're going to go on the treatment and 8 weeks later, you're going to be fine, or you're going to have the tools you need. Nah, this is a lifetime thing. And some guys and gals are better at it than others. I go for periods of time without having to see anybody. And then all of a sudden realize that, man, I'm drinking all the time again. Or, there's, and there's what you can recognize too, is you can recognize in yourself, you become just self-aware, but it's there. And my suicidal ideation is largely, it's managed, but there are times that, give you an example. I had, I deal with these migraines, and I go up and down with the medication I take for them. And sometimes I can go, sometimes I have migraines 5-6 times a week. Sometimes I have them once a week, depending upon how well the medication is doing for me. It's a constant deal with that, And, and so I had a period of time where I went 6 weeks without a migraine, and then they were back, boom. And I am in bed, completely incapacitated, not able to function. And, because the suicide had been that escape route for me, that's where it went. That's where I went to. But I've been therapized enough. I've been with enough great doctors who have taught me enough about this, that as those thoughts are happening, as I'm starting to update my suicide plan in my head, how am I going to do it? All that kind of stuff. I'm able to catch myself. I'm aware, and that's one of the things also too, that, a lot of us are big believers in our meditation and mindfulness practice, because if you become aware of what your mind is saying, if you become aware of what your emotions are saying, you can recognize them for what they are. And, you're not going to strangle them, but you can at least let them go.
Yeah.
Right? And act on them. That's the whole purpose. That's a lot of what we get taught in the VA. A lot of therapies they use in the VA are Buddhist based, and there's a lot of great stuff that comes out of that. And what I will say is that if there is any silver lining in the VA's suicide numbers and statistics, and I'm going to actually vent for a second here, because it is put out their 2021 report. And, you go back to the 2014 report, the first report the VA puts out in suicide statistics, all kinds of data in there, breaks it out into demographic groups, all kinds of useful stuff. You look at this 2021 report, there it is scant with information. There is hardly anything you can utilize in there to understand the problem. It just talks about the general veteran population, doesn't give you any idea of what differences between age groups, or whether they were deployed or not, or certainly not about combat. It's worthless, you know. But one thing we do know is that veterans who are in veterans healthcare have a much, your chances of suicide are much lower if you are in the VA system than if you are not. And veterans who are in VA healthcare, their suicide rate has held steady. Now, it's still amazingly high, way too high, particularly among combat veterans. But compared to those veterans who are not in veterans healthcare, that rate continues to grow every year of suicide. So if there is something to say about as much as the VA has been lambasted and excoriated and disparaged, and rightfully so in many cases, there has been in the last 10 years a real effort in the VA to rectify all those problems and address this. And you know, one of the issues is the VA system is, the saying is, if you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. The VA system is, the VA center, the way it was set up, the various VA medical centers, their directors are kings and queens. They've got their own little fiefdom. So if you go to one VA and it sucks, I encourage you to try and go to another VA. I know that's difficult because of location and distance, but I have seen that personally. Some VAs are much better than others. And in my VA in particular, say the Durham VA, the mental health care is, you know, it's the reason why I'm here talking to you, Eric, is because of people like Dr. Berlin and Dr. Hibbard and Dr. Capehart and others.
It's sad that, you know, you go into the military and you're trained how to use your weapon. You're trained how to jump out of an airplane. You're trained how to keep your head down near the chopper. I mean, you name it. You're trained for months and months and months. And then you described to me the situation, you know, where the migraines come back, or you are having these thoughts, or you're having this situation, and you need a different set of skill sets to get through that. So someone's got to give you this toolbox. Someone's got to help you with the set of skills that's going to get you out of this, or get you to continue on a road to health. And, you know, like you said, whether it's through the VA or whether it's through group session or one-on-one or whatever, you have to learn these skills, just like you had to learn how to do the stuff that got you into the situation where all of this stuff started. So it's darkly, I don't know if it's ironic, but it's just this dark kind of reality that, you know, it's the old Rambo thing. You know, we taught him how to kill, but then we didn't teach him how to live. You know, it's that whole kind of thing. And we joke, but it's a set of skills that you have to develop to be able to get through the rest of your life.
Well, you know, in the Marine Corps and the Army and, you know, whatever, Coast Guard, you know, the Coast Guard training is really, I mean, I had a kid, a Marine of mine, who left the Marine Corps and joined the Coast Guard, and became one of those guys who jumps out of the helicopters in the middle of a hurricane to save somebody. You know, I'm not doing that. You know, I mean, that's a special kind of hardness and right. I mean, I'm not doing that, you know, like, but you know, they're very good at teaching short-term mental toughness, right? So you'll do a road march, like you'll have, you know, you'll march for 15 or 20 miles with 70 pounds of gear and kit and your weapon and everything else. And it's hard. It sucks. You get through it. It's short term. It's that mental toughness. You're not going to quit. This is completely different. This is a lifetime. So all the things, all the tools the Marine Corps or the Army or whoever teaches you about getting through these circumstances that they put you into, and you're trained that way. You're trained to deal with sleep deprivation. You're trained to deal with, you know, anything, like, you know, all the different scenarios. And it's all short term though. Right? It's all short term. It's not, it's going to be like this every time you wake up for the rest of your life, you know, completely. So that's a very good point, Eric, about we're not giving, and go back to what I said earlier about a young man or woman joins the Army and the Marine Corps, you know, and they spend in the Marine Corps, it's 13 weeks of recruit training. And then they go to their MOS, their military occupation skill, their job training, for anywhere from 6 weeks to, I don't know, a year and a half, depending upon what they're learning. And then they go to their unit and they just do that job over and over and over again, train and train and train. And there's nothing on the back end of that. So we condition these young men and women, particularly in combat arms, to kill. And then there's no deconditioning on the back end. It's not brainwashing, it's conditioning. And there's no deconditioning. And I mean, so there's a lot to that could be done better. And it's just a question of money and resources. You're telling me, look, the Congress just appropriated close to $800 billion for the Pentagon. That's just for the Pentagon. We spend about a $1.25 trillion every year on the military, on wars, on intelligence, on debt payments for past military and war spending, on veterans, on nuclear weapons, about like $1.25 trillion. But we don't have enough money to, when these young men and women get out of the military, send them to something to help them decondition, to learn these things, right? To learn about PTSD and traumatic brain. Because again, this goes back to what we were talking about a while ago, the fact that so many of these things require self-reporting, and there's a latency. PTSD is pretty immediate, but with traumatic brain injury, there's a latency. I don't start having my traumatic brain injury symptoms until 2014. And I'm a veterans advocate at this point. At this point, I'm actually, when I start having those symptoms, I'm actually certified as a peer support specialist, as a veteran peer support specialist. So I should know about this stuff. Meanwhile, this stuff starts happening to me, the migraines, the extreme fatigue, the cognitive dysfunction, on and on and on. I have no idea what's happening to me because there's a latency, right? It's not immediate. There's a latency. So, I mean, we're not even, are we teaching these young men and women when they leave that, look, 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years from now, stuff may start happening to you because of some event or a series of events that occurred to you previously.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the question of resources and money, and that's a choice. We choose not to do this.
Do you, as part of where you are now versus where you were a couple of years ago, and you name the year, whatever your darkest times were, do you grasp onto positive things? Like, do you look at is your world a more positive place now personally?
Yeah.
Are there things that bring, like, besides football, are there things that bring you happiness when the Chargers win?
I'm a Giants fan, so
okay.
It hasn't been very. I think the Chargers, for some reason, I think the Chargers are playing at night because but like actually football is interesting because I have a tough time watching football now because the brain injuries that the football players go through are similar, not the same, but they're similar to what the veterans are going through. So I've had a hard time watching football these last several years, watching these young guys, do this to themselves. I've had a problem, and I watch football all my life, No, I mean, I live I've had enough therapy and I've done enough with my life spiritually, I think, to be at a pretty good place. I live a life with a traumatic brain injury. It's difficult. I get frustrated. I mean, again, I told you yesterday I got up around, I have to sleep. I have to sleep 10 hours a night at least. Otherwise I have problems. So I got up about 10 a.m. yesterday. And by noon, I was back down in bed with a migraine that lasted until about 3 o'clock or so, right? And then what time did I speak to you yesterday? I can't remember. But anyway, maybe I'm confusing my days.
No, it was yesterday.
Okay, I'm confusing my days, whatever. But I'll give you the point I was trying to get to is that my girlfriend comes over last night, and as she was driving over here, I get a migraine, and so that ruins our night together, So I mean, I have to live with that, and it's very easy to be frustrated. It's very easy to be woe is me. It's very easy to be, throw a pity party for yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to get into depression that way. It's very easy to be angry, again, I don't have a time machine, nothing I can do about it. So I've learned a lot though from my doctors and my therapists, about trying to build with what I have now. And, I'm a big believer in the work of Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. If people aren't familiar with he comes out of the concentration camp and writes his book about suffering, right. About how suffering gives us purpose, how suffering gives us meaning. Not to mean you should jump into suffering and suffer for the sake of suffering, but the idea that you can make something out of that, something can come from that. Mm-hmm. So I do. I try and but I mean, I have my good days with that. I have my bad days with that. I've lived. I'm 48. I've been living with this brain injury for 7 years now. And yeah, I mean, honestly, there are times when I was just thinking the other day, hey, I'm a year and a half away from being 50. And then the next thought I had in my head was, man, my 40s have been a lost decade because of this brain injury. It's been a lost decade, and, because that's a thought that's going to come. And then, but I've done enough. I've worked with enough people. I've done enough meditation and mindfulness practice. I still do that stuff, right? To recognize that thought for what it was.
Yeah.
And I have
50's the new 30. 50's the new 30.
Absolutely. Right, Eric, I have a choice between, I can either stick with that thought and follow that thought. Oh, my 40s have been lost. Oh, woe is me, Or I could say, well, hey, even if that's true, that doesn't matter today and tomorrow. And doesn't mean that my 50s have to be. Now, my 50s could be that way, but who knows? I mean, I can do things. So so it is. There's, and it is hard. Of course it's hard.
But you got good days, you got bad days. We all have good days and bad days. Yours are just unique to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for what, I'm going to not take my own advice, because as I lectured you before, but like it could be worse, right? Actually, I see on people can't see, but I can see behind you, you've got a pillow that says things could be worse. I used to have, when I used to work in Crystal City, in between my second time in Iraq and my time in Afghanistan, people are familiar. They've ever seen the movie Platoon, soldiers burning shit, right? You've got the 55 gallon drum, cut, and then you shit into that, and then you pour, when it's full, you pour some diesel into it, and then you light it on fire, and you literally have to stand there. And I've got a photo of a kid doing that up in Haditha, and I used to keep that in where I used to work to remind me, like, I could be burning shit right now. I could be just like that kid standing, over a burning thing of shit with a stick, stirring it. So yeah, things could always be worse. So yeah, and I try, as well as what I've been taught, like I said, and I'm grateful for what I have, grateful for my family, so to get long way of saying, yeah, I am happy.
You could, I can't think of a better way to end it with, you could be standing over a half steel drum of burning shit, stirring it. So you're back on.
Right now, there's somebody doing that. Honestly,
there's somebody's out there. Yeah.
Somebody's doing that. Yeah.
There's always somebody worse off. No matter what, there's always somebody. So you're back on Twitter now.
Yeah. Yeah.
How's that going?
I probably on Twitter 3 or 4 times. I'm at a better place where I don't have to. I use it for my purposes, right? I've become the mindfulness stuff, the resilience I've built, right? I'm able to be on Twitter because of that. I'm able to just focus on what I want to focus on, not look at the nonsense, the vitriol, the hate, the miscontrol. I mean, it's unbelievable. And what I find is that if you are proactive in how you use it, you can find a lot of great stuff. You can follow a lot of great people. You can learn a lot of good people. If I choose to read the comments underneath someone who's being intentionally provocative, well, I get what I deserve then in terms of feeling disgusted and sick at myself and why am I looking at this and everything else. But if I choose to follow someone who I can learn from, engage with people who are engaging in good faith, it can be a pretty great experience.
It can be. I like Instagram a little better because it's prettier pictures, I guess. Yeah, it's a little less of a screaming ground. But I hear what you're saying. If you wandered into it, it's your own damn fault.
Yeah, it's particularly on it's like my 3rd or 4th attempt at it. So yeah. But yeah, no, at this time around, I've found it to be a positive more than a negative.
Where can people find you on Twitter? What's your handle?
Matthew P. Hoh. So P as in Patrick, H-O-H.
But better place is your website. You don't update it as much, but I have a feeling you're going to get better about it.
No.
But your web, no? Nope. Ain't going to happen. Nope.
Probably not going to happen. I mean, I mean, I do. At this point, I post once every 2 or 3 months, kind of just like a collection of things. What I need to get back into is writing more specifically for that. I started this blog in 2013 to kind of as a way to want to help other people who are going through similar issues with the PTSD and the moral injury. I hadn't had the traumatic brain injury hadn't really surfaced yet. So that was the purpose of it. So I need to get back to doing more of that, because I follow a lot of people who do that. So it's just a way of me doing what other guys and gals are doing, right? I mean, these people have helped me. So and this is my way of, maybe helping other people.
Yeah. Well, I would highly suggest, even if it's just to contact you and talk, that's a great way to get a hold of you. I'll make sure that I post the website.
My email address is on the page, on the About Me page, or the About the Blog page, or something like that. So
yeah, it's on there. And I would also highly suggest, like, this has been, I think it's funny, we talked during the pre-interview, and we talked for about 20 minutes on the pre-interview, and I remember at some point I'm like, I don't think we're gonna have any problems talking for a while. So we're at the 2.5 hour mark. Take that, Joe Rogan. So I would highly suggest, if anybody wants to hear the way you can converse on certain topics, search out some of your interviews that I've listened to. I brought up the one with Crystal Ball on her show. It was much more like targeted. But this was fun because we just went through every topic on, we won't talk about your Giants obsession, but I'm more of a baseball guy. So you start talking about the Cubs, then we'll get into that.
I'm a Mets fan. So
we're done. We're done.
And why do I do this to myself? I have a.
You're saying that to a Cubs fan?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We did win the one year, but still.
Hey, yeah, no, we won the World Series when I was 13. So that's.
Yeah, Dwight Gooden.
Yeah.
I remember that. But yeah, it's, if you want to hear Matt's talk on some specific issues, I thought what you were talking about that I found really interesting. We didn't get into it that much today. But the history of Afghanistan, and how it's not just one war, how it's not just one situation, how the poppy fields, the warlords, the CIA, the whole region, how all that plays into it. And I think one thread that went through our conversation today is how people can be very myopic. People can be very shallow view, whether it's, this is how the war happened, or this is how the fall of the pullout happened, or whether it's, soldiers' PTSD. Even it's a very short-sighted attitude, not paying attention to what got people to that point, and not paying attention to where they're going to go from that point. So I really see that as a common thread through the entire conversation. So there's my little 2 cents on whatever, my little soapbox moment. But I really enjoyed it. I'm hoping we can talk again at some point. You seem to enjoy being able to just to go for a change.
Hey, if people don't notice, no one likes the sound of my voice more than me. So I've always been able to talk. I've come from New Jersey. My dad was the same way, that's what I probably loved about the Marine Corps the best, was I could stand in front of my Marines. I had a captive audience, and they had to stay. They couldn't leave.
Had attention too.
Yeah, it just it's interesting though, because just one thing about like my traumatic brain injury is I can't write that well anymore. So I've written some things over the last several months. People can see them on CNN or Newsweek or Counterpunch, or I can't remember where else I got published someplace. But what I have to do though, because of my brain injury, I use a software called Otter, which is a transcription service. So I dictate my essays, and then Otter transcribes it, does a really pretty good job. And then I spend a couple of days trying to edit it. Then I use Grammarly, because one of the things I found is that with the traumatic brain injury, for some reason, my ability to write has really deteriorated. Like, I'll make basic grammar mistakes that I wouldn't have made 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. So, I was a professional. when I was in the Secretary of Navy's office, that was my job. I was a writer, I was a professional writer, basically. I've always written well. And so that's one of the things with the TBI is like, I can't do what's called, executive functions, where you got to do more than one thing. So I can think it and speak it, But that process of then extending it through my hands onto the keyboard and looking at the screen is a little too much for me.
Yeah.
And it's something but the VA has been great about teaching me other ways to handle things. VA has been great about, they put me through a whole course, about a 5-month long course to learn how to do things differently. And it's very helpful, and you have tools. We do have tools that we can help us. So that was just me. That just popped in my head because I do enjoy the opportunity to talk because I can't write as much as I don't write as much as I used to.
You seem to have a good spirit about it, though. You do seem to have a very positive approach. Like you and I were talking, we didn't talk about it during the interview, but we talked about my mother has a closed head injury, so she deals with some of these things, and she gets very frustrated, but she also tries to have the best humor about it that she can. So she's in her 70s, so sometimes she'll chalk it up to, well, I'm just getting older, or sometimes she'll use it as an excuse. She's like, well, I have a head injury. It's like, no, Mom, that's not what happened, But one of her favorite ones is always like, oh, well, I'm having a blonde moment, and she's brunette, so it's totally off the wall. And I'm like, so out there, blondes are getting mad at me right now for saying that, but that's the way she approaches it, and that's the way she has a good attitude about it. So it seems like you have the same thing.
Yeah, so. You have to. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole discussion on that. But you do. Because the alternative is pretty crappy.
Yeah, it can get pretty dark.
It's a choice. Yeah, that's so much. This is a choice, and it gets to you have to. It's that idea of radical acceptance. It's accepting the things that won't change. Right?
That's very Buddhist.
Yeah,
that's very.
Whether it's like people like Tara Brach or Jack Kornfield or Eckhart Tolle or those folks who teach those kinds of things, right? That if you accept what you're going through, the things that can't be changed or can't be modified or anything, well, you leave that behind. Then it allows you're not dragging all this stuff with you. It allows you to do things, and if you accept your limitations, in many ways it finds you find ways to find other things. You're not, it's like that paradox. By accepting your limitations, you're actually opening yourself up for more things because you're not looking through, one particular way any longer. Now you're being forced to look through other avenues, other approaches. You're not looking through one singular straw. You've had to pick up another straw to look through.
Yeah.
So no, there's benefits from it. Certainly, I wish I didn't have it, but so it goes,
Yeah, brother, this has been educational, entertaining, and just pretty damn fun to actually like talk shop with you for a while. So we'll send everybody to your website, and I really appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck, man, and I hope to do this again. I really hopefully we can have a discussion and dive into some of the political side, but I'm hoping it isn't based on some horrible world event or something. I'd love to I'm gonna have to get all my notes together and do a little research on I did see that what was that you were the Oliver Stone documentary that you had mentioned in an interview, the history. I had seen that. I had actually seen that when it came out. And when you brought it up, I was like, I know that one. I know exactly what he's talking about. So I have the book around somewhere.
For people who aren't familiar, the story, I think I was in the Crystal Ball interview I did. I talked about at some point in Afghanistan. This is anecdotal. I heard this from other Marines, that a Marine Corps unit had gotten a hold of. There is a box copy, the DVDs of Oliver Stone's Untold History, and they were circulating around through the unit and causing problems. As the Marines were becoming aware of what they were taking part in and the history, how everything had led to this, and how this is not what you can draw a line from the decimation, the genocide of the Native American Indians all the way here to Afghanistan. Really? As they're putting those pieces together, about American empire and imperialism and colonialism, they're starting to not be so happy. And yet, so supposedly the story is that this Marine Corps unit had to confiscate these DVDs for the sake of the morale of the Marines in Afghanistan.
I've always been fascinated by the propaganda and the education of the troops, like going back to Why We Fight in World War II and those videos and everything. It's just always fascinated me, especially when you you have, especially back then, you still have it now, but especially back then, you would have soldiers that had never left their town. Some of them had never gone to school. So they had to teach them how to drive. They had to teach them they didn't even know the countries that they were going to fight in. And
that's the whole, right?
How they did it.
Yeah, the whole that old line about how you're going to keep them on the farm after they've seen Paris.
Mm-hmm.
That's the result of these young men coming back from Europe after the First World War. How you can keep them on the farm in Iowa or Nebraska or wherever after they've been to Paris.
Yeah, that's our next discussion.
Yeah,
that's a whole 2 hours right there. So
absolutely,
yeah.
Hey, I appreciate it, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.
For the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.
All rights reserved. Viking Dog 2021.